Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Twin Raven Critique podcast book club, where we're going to be talking about Altered Carbon by Richard K. Morgan. For this one, I think we had talked about maybe looking at it in its various formats. It's got a Netflix show, it's got an audiobook, it's got a book. I listened to the audiobook and had a great time with it. I thought, very good. So that's what we're talking about today. Going to be looking at that. And for those of you who are unacquainted, in the 25th century, humankind has spread throughout the galaxy, monitored by the watchful eye of the UN. While divisions in race, religion, and class still exist, advances in technology have redefined life itself. Now, assuming one can afford the expensive procedure, a person's consciousness can be stored in a cortical stack at the base of the brain and easily downloaded into a new body, or sleeve, making death nothing more than a minor blip on a screen. Ex-UN envoy Takeshi Kovacs has been killed before, but his last death was particularly painful. Dispatched 180 light years from home, re-sleeved into a body in Bay City, formerly San Francisco, now with a rusted, dilapidated Golden Gate Bridge, Kovacs is thrown into the dark heart of a shady, far-reaching conspiracy that is vicious even by the standards of a society that treats existence as something that can be bought and sold. Where shall we begin?
Let's start with the background about why I wanted to recommend this book. Other than I thought you would particularly like it.
Good call.
I got in, yeah. I got into it with somebody because so when I saw the Netflix series, I had never read the book, right? I didn't actually know it was based off of a book until like later on, right? And I thought the Netflix show was actually really good, and I made the mistake of saying that to somebody who had read the book, right? And he
Mm.
pretty much started foaming at the mouth the moment I said that. And so I said, okay, well, I mean, if you feel that passionately about it, then I'll definitely go ahead and read the book. And as somebody who usually likes to respect source material, I always think that's a good move because there's always something that happens in narrative rooms and between the script writers and the director that takes away from the source material, right? So, and I don't know how much of a comparison of that you want to do. I don't know if you actually watched the show or not, sir.
So, in the distant past, I did watch, I think, like the first 6 episodes of the first
Mhm.
season. I want to say
Mhm.
I didn't actually wrap the first season, and I have heard from coworkers that the show did not improve in its second season. I can't, I'm
No,
not
it
gonna,
did not.
yeah, hang my hat on that one, but yeah, that seems to be
Yeah.
the prevailing opinion.
Yeah, I can give you a couple of page to screen discrepancies that occurred within that, but I know that's not usually what we do here. But if you would like to know, I would be happy to talk about that with you as
Yeah,
well.
no, definitely, we can do that.
But that was the history, and there's something that I always really love when you talk about somebody who feels like very passionate about a particular IP, right? Because like one of the fun things that comes with escapism, which you and I have talked about a little bit, is that people really get invested into it, right? Because that's the thing that they're diving into to get away from their daily life. And whenever I get like such a volatile response from somebody, but it's not in the kind of irrational rage. Stance that you and I have kind of observed from other folks, I'm like, okay, maybe there's something here. And I'm really happy that I actually read the book because the book is so much better. Oh my goodness, it is.
I was pleasantly surprised with the difference in how much I enjoyed this versus the sort of tepid interest that I had in the show. The show was not, it wasn't a turnoff, it wasn't bad, but the book is really good.
Oh, it's so good. So I guess let's do what we like to do, which is like what was one of your favorite parts in this?
Um, to be honest with you, okay, so here's the thing. I guess this is not, I don't have like a big back catalog of detective story noir things that I can point to and say like, oh, I definitely like this genre. But I think that I do. There's
Mhm.
something about having a mystery to be in the process of solving that's like very mentally engaging for me as
Mhm.
I'm going through a story. This one I really liked because it was in parallel a little bit this mystery of like what the character's actually dealing with, and oftentimes wondering like, okay, how the hell is this possibly related to the thing that we're supposed to be focusing on here, like the promise of the story, basically, but also the slow, very methodical unraveling of the way that the technology that is sort of core to the world building of the story works. And I think the author does a very good job of like slowly parceling out visible explanations of the way that various things have come to change how the culture looks at various like experiences or the way that it's manifesting in society. So I liked how there was this kind of like video game-esque level design of each different arc that was like, oh, and now you're going to learn about AI. And now you're going to learn about the concept of like what sets apart person who is like really truly immortal from someone who is just like hopping from one body to the next, maybe, and like learning how their long distance travel works and stuff like that, because they don't like lay it all out at once. They kind of like give case examples through the story to explain each one so that you can kind of like piece together for yourself like, oh, I see, that's how this culture has adapted around this technology that's now available to them that is fantastical and not real. So that was all very cool. I guess the scenes that I liked the best were like usually his interactions with his nemesis character, because that I loved the way that they were portrayed as this like shamanistic, like weird, like defying the human form kind of god when they first meet in the digital cell, like virtual space. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I remember that really well.
Yeah, that was a cool scene. And I think also the interactions between him and Bancroft and Miriam in the beginning and kind of like Act 1, Act 2 are fun. This guy fucks a lot. There's I was startled a little bit. I was like, I guess I remember from the show that this guy sees a little bit of action, but man, it is like constant.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely one of the things so you and I, when we've kind of read like our other work so far, like they don't really dive into the graphic nature of many things at the level that this book does. And when I mean graphic, I mean like physical, I mean violence, like all of that stuff. Like there's no detail left unturned when it comes to this book. Like the author took the time to really kind of explore things when they were at their best and when they were at their worst. And it was I guess it's not really a spoiler, but if people are sensitive to spoilers, I mean this is gonna probably be one of those episodes. But what I thought was really interesting is that there definitely is, an action scene, as you put it, where it's with him and somebody else, and they mentally sync up,
Oh, that was so
right?
cool. I was like, not to be weird. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, and so like they mentally sync up. So on top of feeling and seeing what they are, they're also getting the sensations and the visual input from the other person at the same time, right? Which up until, that particular book, like I hadn't really like experienced that, which is saying a lot because I've played like Eve and I played Star Trek, and you would think that if there was going to be like a demographic that was going to explore that would be those two areas. But no, and so we had those, and then I guess while I'm still on this train of thought, when we're talking about kind of the graphical material, I thought like some of the ways that they were depicting torture in this scene was actually really interesting. Like, not to be weird, but I actually had to rewind a chapter and listen to it again because I wasn't listening to it for the details, but I was listening to it for the psychology of it. And there's a scene where our main character is actually getting tortured, but what they did was they put him in a female body.
Yeah.
And they put him in a female body with the intention to violate him. And what really got me was like in order to like make you feel like at your worst, we're going to first put you into a physical form that you're not used to and that you're going to feel your most vulnerable at, and then we're going to violate you, right? I must have like probably like thought about that way too hard, but I thought it was really interesting that for you to really feel like at your lowest at that point, like they had to put you in such a completely different perspective at that point. So I mean, there was that. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, he definitely sees a lot of action in this series, and I don't mean like just in this particular book, but I mean like throughout, right? For me, I guess doesn't surprise me too much because I was in the military, and if there's one thing that I knew is that the people that usually got went out into action got a lot of action when they got home as well.
Yeah, it's the adrenaline that's always going on, and I guess he's got also some sort of like neurochemical adrenal thing going on also that is like constantly pumping him full of like artificial hormones as well.
Hmm.
So he's stacked.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh man, that there was so much that was going on in here, like on like a such a fun level. Like we talked like there was a moment where he was attracted to like the female detective in the show, like Ortega, or not in the
Mm-hmm.
show, but in the book too.
Yeah.
So in the story, Ortega is this female detective that's trying to get to the bottom of this case so that way she can get the sleeve, aka the body of her, her lover back, right? And give it back to the person it needs to go to. And so, our main character, while he's in that body, he always feels like this subtle attraction to her, right? And he
Yeah.
keeps and he keeps feeling it until they put him into a completely different body, and then he's like, "Oh, I was never attracted to her at all. It's just like a pure
Yeah.
pheromone." Yeah, it's a pure chemical pheromone level thing. So, like, once the moment that the bodies weren't compatible with it, there was no longer a physical attraction. I was like, "Oh man, this is the author reminding us that we're nothing but animals at this point."
Yeah. I think that maybe one of my favorite, I mean, there's a lot of like themes to unpack that were a lot of fun to play with. But I think the one that I had the most fun with was the all the stuff that they did to kind of like explain is different about a human psyche if you strip away its attachment to its physical form. And I think the fact that the book like goes to the trouble of basically not ever even really using the word body, like constantly referring to people's bodies just as sleeves, and it's like that's literally all it is. It's just a garment. There's consequences of it, like you hear about his maladaptation to various forms, or if he's responding a certain way in one sleeve that he otherwise wouldn't in another, or if he's got addictions in one sleeve that he wouldn't otherwise have in the other.
Oh, yeah, like because the one that they put him in the beginning had a smoking habit, and he was, like, spending, like, half the book trying to break his sleeve of the smoking habit. I remember that.
It's so interesting, you know? But it's like, I just really enjoy the argument. I don't necessarily know like where I come down on how much I am persuaded by it, but I think the fact that they pose it at all and they say that like, okay, once you have thoroughly severed this connection of psyche and body, which things belong in which realm, and
I
I
thought
had a
oh, go
lot of
on,
fun
I'm sorry.
exploring that. No, go ahead, please.
I was gonna say that I find that that's a reoccurring question. So, technically, this genre of book is referred to as cyberpunk, right?
Yep.
Cyberpunk sci-fi.
Yep.
And a lot of times in Cyberpunk, they like to ask that question because they always have androids or cyborgs or whatever in those stories. I remember before this book, the earliest one that I heard this question posed in was actually Ghost in the Shell with Major Kusanagi. And Major Kusanagi was always kind of wondering, it's like, I've got nothing of my organic original body left. All I have is like, what's left of my brain, but my brain doesn't produce the chemicals or the hormones that my body would produce. So part of me is still me, and what part of me is a machine, right? And that's a really fun series, Ghost in the Shell. If you haven't had the time to watch it, it's one of my favorites. I think you would actually really enjoy it. The show, not to be confused with the manga, because the manga was like this one shot off thing that the creator created. But it's always like such a fun question where we kind of explore like the nature of the human soul. Like if we take it out of the thing that was organically grown into, then what is it at that?
Yeah. They also posit, I mean, there's a few other like explorations of what that is like in this, where they kind of talk about like, okay, sometimes you end up in just another, I mean, most of the time, it sounds like there's this like a little bit of class discussion in this. There's kind of a overarching narrative of like, there's people who are really truly immortal who are very difficult to kill because they basically have like a remote backup. They truly are the EVE Online players, where it doesn't matter if you even destroy like the thing that would otherwise be the little hard drive in their neck, because they're constantly being backed up to a remote location with the like weird quantum entanglement needle type thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of discussion about like, oh, okay, there's these obscenely wealthy people who have this and they get so old they stop giving a shit about things that are more temporary than them. And then you hear like both sides of that argument. A little bit of that, but most of the exploration is a little more, I guess, intimate, sort of dealing with your personal relationship with your body as opposed to like societal mechanisms. There is, but I didn't feel like that was the main point that he was trying to drive home. It was not the primary theme, in my judgment.
Now, my take was kind of like, I guess it's like, what do we become when you take like different elements of ourselves away from each other? And he kind of, well, in my opinion, he explored it in a couple different ways. There's a particular scene where Kovac has to go and get an expert attacker. Kovac is also our main MC. If I know we mentioned it before, but it's at this point sometimes the listeners may forget. He had to go and get, the hacker that was actually the mother of the catalyst of what started this entire story, right? And this is actually one of the big major story differences that happened between the book and the show. And like I was always wondering like why did you do this? But in the book, what happens is this hacker woman is basically put into cold storage, right? Like she's just taken off the board, she's put in somewhere else. And they go and get her because they need her unique skills, right? And because her body's not readily available, it's actually being rented out, right? Like her body, because it was still like in its prime and good and stuff like that, was being rented out by another like socialite, right? And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that. But when they got her stack and went to put it into another body, they put it into another female body who was a little younger, and she had like such a disjoint experience, right? Because she was looking in a mirror, not seeing herself, and she was having all kinds of complex issues. And then on top of that, she gets reunited with her husband, right? And then there's a whole bunch of other complex issues that happen after that because on one level, you have the people that know each other, right? You have the people that know each other and they love each other and they want to be together with each other. Then you have the physical differences. And so it's like, I think the thing that got me in that particular scene when they were talking about the husband and wife reuniting was that even though mentally and spiritually they were together because the physical body was different, they almost felt like they were cheating on each other, right?
Like they have their sort of inescapable hangups about the fact that it's not the actual physical person.
Yeah.
It's hard to like persuade yourself that the identity is what matters.
Yeah. And the reason I say this is a big difference from the show is because in the book they put her into a younger female body, right? But in the show they put her into like an older male body, right? And I remember when I got to like that difference in the scene, and if there's one thing that Netflix likes to do, it likes to, I guess we'll call it be creative. It likes to be creative with some of the things that it takes. And I was just like, I still like, even at remembering like that subtle difference, I was like, why did you have to make that difference though? Because you're still facing the same question, right? If your loved one comes back to you in another body, doesn't matter what it is or whatever, right? It's still going to prompt the question. So why did the showrunners feel the need to put it instead of in a younger female body to put it in a male older body, right?
Yeah. Maybe to make it
Yeah.
like a more obvious contrast for people if it's not like
Mhm.
super easy to get that shall we call it a psychological expression of thought and opinion across without words in like
Mhm.
a screenplay. That's the only reason I can think.
That would be very kind of you. I'll go with that. That seems like the better way to do
That's my
it.
very generous. I don't know. I don't think I made it that far in the show.
Oh, you know what? You're lucky.
So what was I gonna? The other theme that I thought was kind of fun to play around with. I mean, lots of cool stuff going on with the world building of it. I get the sense that he didn't spend a crazy amount of time thinking about it beyond just the implications of it and then stuck to the story, which I think is maybe the best possible way to craft something like this, like just worry about the story and make that all the elements kind of like line up with it and make sense about it. But the thing that I liked, one of the nods that I liked to the cyberpunk genre in itself, is that for whatever reason, I don't know where this trend began, but really from everything from like the tabletop system to Snow Crash and all that stuff, there's always this injection of like, we must mention Japanese culture. You know, it like always is a ubiquitous thing that will come up. He was very like hero protagonist esque from what is that guy's name? Neil Stevenson, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I mean, his character reminded me of that a little bit. His nemesis kind of reminded me of Raven a little bit. I don't know if that was like an actual influence, but I enjoyed it as a reader, thinking about the parallels between the two. The fact that his first name is Takeshi. He at one point there's like a very quick line when he's like having an aggravated like conversation with someone that he likens the sort of theatrical dramatic nonsense that he's been roped into as a no dance.
Oh yeah, the no dance. Yeah, yeah.
And he talks about also the like someone from his former life or something like that being involved with the Yakuza, and so no one was surprised when they went away. And I was just like, I love that. If you could count on any culture to survive hundreds of years and hundreds of light years of distance, and the weird way that they were talking about like how colonization works, you know, it's Japan. They're going to be there.
Well, I think he's supposed to actually be Japanese, and he grew up in a yakuza as well. Now I can't remember if that's with the book lore, but I know that's what they tried to do with the show lore at one point. Because I mean, not that you're gonna watch it, but like in the second one, he has a reunion with his old gang and stuff like that, and they have like this. It's not quite a ceremony, but they definitely have like a return to customs moment. And you know, considering that particular demographic where like customs and traditions are very important to them, I actually really like that head nod to that because I think one of the things that is really telling about human society is, and I don't want to use the word cherry pick, but it's which cultural traditions kind of endure the test of time. And I know that Japanese culture is really big on trying to maintain what they can in what shape or form that they can. Because I mean, as of right now, they're facing a reduced birth rate, so they're getting older and they're not having a lot more younger people, and the younger people aren't super interested in maintaining like the old customs. So that legacy, and honoring that legacy is definitely something that's very important to them because they don't want it to be forgotten.
And yeah, I think you're right. At least that he has some like level of that heritage, because they talk about a little bit like the world that he is from. Like, what's it called? Harlan's world. Is was originally a colony where the sort of people who went to establish it were Japanese, and they had East European labor along for the ride. So it's like a hence his last name. So he's like some intermixed result of those two cultures being together in sort of a vacuum in one little space. But they don't talk about the Eastern European culture as much. Feels like that's like not a focus.
No, I don't think that was a focus either. I think it's just character flavor. You know what I mean? Yeah, it wasn't like a main driving point, which I guess like in regards to talking about the world building of this book, which is kind of what we're venturing on. Um, I really do like how the author managed to work in the the world building without like staggering it or taking long pauses to explain everything, right?
Yep.
It was usually done when it needed to be done and then enough information for it to be conveyed without breaking the scene. I read so many books where they completely break scene to just jump like, I don't know, like 3 pages of back information that they think the reader needs to read. And like I know like some folks are like really big Tom Clancy fans where they want to read like, 3 pages about a painting that we'll never see again, but that's not me. I'm not into that.
Yeah. Very economical in the presentation of that. I think
hmm
part of what made it so well crafted was how organically it was presented. And again, I liken it to like video game level design, just
hmm
because they drop allusions in like a speech in the very beginning to these various like features of the world building that are important to
hmm
the people that live there, but they don't they give you nothing. They're like, you're gonna figure this one out on your own. And that's kind of like the B mystery of this. If the A mystery is the actual mystery that he's supposed to be solving, is like, okay, how does all this stuff fit together? Like, how does this work? What does it mean if someone is a meth? What does it mean if someone is a, you know, the in this kind of storage? How do they get from one place to another, um, like across space? And they sort of roll that out to you piece by piece in a way where you can add it up on your own and not waste a bunch of time explaining it meticulously, which is so good.
Yeah, I really like that a lot. So since we're talking about the technology, what did you think of the hotel AI that was running the place?
I liked it. I liked all the stuff where they talk about, like, obviously there's this kind of like most pedestrian, most accessible primary technology that everyone concerns themselves with, which is this concept of stacks and sleeves. But then all the other stuff that's around it is equally interesting. So the AI that were, they basically knew how to play the market, right? And so they were the only things that stuck around, that have like weird behavior, that serve really specific purposes, like the hotel AI. That was very fun little feature to have in there. um, Synths, the like concept that some people are like, well, why the hell would I even need an organic body? Like, I don't necessarily want to be shackled to that. I'll just have a synthetic body. There's robots. You see all these different cross sections of intelligent, or like machine intelligence or human intelligence in machine corporeal form, almost like a full gradient. Basically, you get the entire spectrum. So I enjoyed all the explorations of all that. But yeah, the hotel AI made for a very fun, like, first dramatic. I mean, it wasn't even the first dramatic action sequence, but it is a hell of a Jarvis. It's a good thing to have around and
It
on your
is.
side.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that I felt was a little tragic, I can use words, was the fact that the hotel AI, like, it was programmed to want guests, right?
Yeah,
And I think what was kind of sad about is that it was new that it knew it was programmed to want that, and even though it knew, it wouldn't stop doing it, right?
yeah,
Yeah, and it was like I guess for me it was just like always wanting to fulfill a need that would never really fully get fulfilled, because as soon as it got done, it would be like, okay, I need another guest. When do I get another guest? And
right.
when Kovac shows up, he's like the only one that's in that building too. So who knows how long that hotel was like waiting for somebody to show up.
Yeah, I think they liken it to like impulses or urges that humans get, like, biologically. It basically like coded it in that way so that
Mhm.
the intelligence couldn't like outfox it. Uh,
Mhm.
and it was precisely the fact that the AI hotels, like, just kind of freaked people out so much that they became highly unpopular, and it was like why most people tried to avoid them.
Like,
So
I just want you to come stay at my place. Please come stay at my place. I want you to stay at my place. Please come stay at my
yeah, very insistent.
place. That was such a big difference in the show and the book, because obviously the character that they referenced the hotel after was different, probably because they couldn't get rights to the original intention.
Mm,
But in the show, they definitely made the hotel be like a much stronger presence, and I can talk about some of those deviations from the story towards the end. But I guess following that, so here's another difference that I thought was interesting. So in the show, they kind of briefully talked about how there was a religious group, right? That
yes.
wasn't fond of the stacks. They were like, you should not play God and don't play God, and once you die, kind of thing.
Yep.
So in the show, they never wanted to really reference who that group was, or if they did, they may have done it once and never mentioned it again, kind of thing.
Hmm.
But in the book, it was always Catholics. Catholics were like, "No, you don't play God. Once you die, you die." I guess the thing that really struck me about that was in the book, it was actually part of the main plot of
Yeah,
of
it was quite
why it was hard
significant
for
to the
them.
story.
Yeah, and so when they removed that from the show, it took away like a major layer of kind of like the subtle conversation that was happening at that point.
Yeah, I did enjoy how they brought it up. I thought it was interesting, not necessarily surprising, because there's really not the principal characters who you follow and get to talk to most of the time have their reasons for being very attached to the technology that they have sort of already endorsed and already are using. But
Mhm.
it was interesting to me the tone that the author chose to take, which was of disdain and vitriol toward it. It
Yeah.
was like pretty open distaste for the fact that like anyone would have an issue with this kind of technology or have any
Mhm.
objection to it,
Mhm.
which is kind of crazy. That's like a little weird to think about, you know? Like, surely you would have your opt outs,
Mhm. Yeah.
but
Um,
this took it more for granted that, like, oh, why would you not want this? Of course you
mhm.
would want this.
Yeah, and I guess the reason it got me because like you and I just commented, like in the book, it was actually a major plot point, right?
Yeah.
So when they were like, "Well, why can't you just take like the victim and put them in a new body?" And the first thing they said was, "Well, she's Catholic," right? And then everybody in the room was like, "Well, fuck," right? Because that means that they couldn't bring her back or question her or anything else like that. But they never wanted to mention that in the show. In fact, in the show, which is it was so I didn't fully remember all the differences between the book and the show until like I was actually writing my talking points for it, and I literally had a WTF moment for a as I was like reflecting on it. Because in the show, the victim who in the book wasn't able to be spoken to or anything else like that, well, they found her, right? Like they found her actually in an alleyway, right? Like they found her disc in an alleyway. And they were able to basically, like, defrag the damage and put her back together, and then for some reason, the computer AI, put her through some kind of, like, severe combat training session, in order to build up her confidence and be able to go from victim to warrior if you wanna do that storyline, stuff like that.
Hmm.
And there was even, like, a segment in the show where she, uses we'll say she uses a 3D printer, right? To remake her body, and this like, goes on a rampage throughout the entire, ship that she's on at the time. Never happened in the book. In fact, again, she's Catholic. Once she deceased, she did not come back. Um, and I when I go back and I think about, like, those differences because I think one of the big, underlining tones in this story is appreciating life for when you have it, right? And so everybody in this show has at some point the ability to come back unless like all your bodies have been like, injected with like some kind of virus. And if you go into it, then that means that you're just going to be destroyed. Like that's the only way that they're going to really be able to like fully terminate you, right?
Yeah.
In the show.
That, or if
But
someone particle beams your shitty Target brand stack.
yeah. Yeah. Or if they do that. But then and I guess for me it takes away like the impact that or rather not maybe not the impact of death, but like the gravity of it, right?
Right.
So this girl that wasn't actually ever supposed to be part of the story ends up being part of the story. And I'll go ahead and say it. Like who I don't know what the showrunners were thinking when they decided to take this character who wasn't supposed to be and put her back in, but they made her very childlike, like very childlike words, very childlike behaviors, like very kiddie. And they put her in like a body of like I don't know, like a 19-year-old or something like that. And that really threw me a little bit, and that's probably my least favorite change that Netflix did, where they decided to take a character that was supposed to be deceased, make her living, but then make her act like a little girl, right? The
Hmm.
entire time. And they tried to justify it by saying that because they had to rebuild her stack from, whatever, that, that's why she acted that way. But that
It's like an
sounds
old backup.
yeah,
Got
it's
it.
like an old backup, right? And so I was like, I think you just wanted to write one of like those character tropes that was like the kid killer, right? But you didn't quite know how to do it, so you were just kind of trying to finagle your way through it, and I didn't like it. So I'll stop my tangent
They
there.
wanted a River Tam.
They did want a River Tam. You're absolutely right, but at least River Tam was actually fun because River Tam would snap out of like the kid moments, and she would like have like full like
Sleeper agent.
intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my god, what a good character.
Hmm.
Um yes. Well, I know what you're talking about. And I think that at least in terms of what they do deliver on in the book, about this kind of like question of, do people view their mortality with any sanctity? You know, it at
Mhm.
least presents the concept that that is a conversation that people are evaluating on a serious level. It just doesn't necessarily like intersect with the book a ton because it's not necessarily the um
Focal
crux
point.
of like the yeah, it's not the focal point of the mystery that's trying to be solved. It's involved in it,
Mhm.
so you at least hear like, oh yes, there are people who do care about this. That's a roadblock, or it presents a challenge to you because you have to honor this person's wishes. uh but more than any kind of like elaborate conversation about how people who think that way are feeling, or why they care about that, or hearing their argument, it's more just like, yeah, they have an argument. This is it. There's kind of a thing in the mix. There's like a basically like Supreme Court type legislation that's uh, on the table about it, which is it becomes important, but is otherwise a kind of Chekhov's gun in the first act. Um, and then I feel like honestly, I feel like the exploration of mortality that happens more often is people who um, are convinced or very comfortable with this notion that their mortality is pretty well protected, that are then suddenly confronted with the fact that, oh, by the way, no, actually, it's not. Like, I'm about to what do they call it? RD, uh,
Real death.
real
Yeah.
death. Yeah, I'm about to
Yeah.
real death you real hard. And in fact, he does it a lot. This guy's kind of like a fucking unhinged psychopath when he gets a weapon in his hand, which uh, it's very funny to me. I think looking back, because after you've like gone through the whole story, there's this line in the beginning where it's like, "Oh, do you? Oh, you're about to go do this thing. Do you want a weapon?" He's like, "No, I'm good." And then it's like, oh wow, this is going to be a story about like a supremely competent fighter who feels really confident in himself and like doesn't necessarily need to kill people, who then goes on to basically murder half of a city.
Yeah, he does.
it's it's
So
great.
that's no, that's a great difference to also point out between the show and the book. So the envoy, right? The envoy corps in the book are actually like these super trained soldiers, right? And they're called the envoys because they're usually the people that are on site, right? So we're gonna send our envoy in there to go look into it, and he'll get back to us, right? Like it was that kind of thing. But in the TV show, these were like wilderness Jedi hobos that were freedom fighters, right? And they were trying to follow some kind of weird mysticism about like their way of teaching. Where the book was like, no, we have been trained on how to switch sleeves at notice and do all these other things, and to like make sure that we're hyper focused on the thing that has to get done, and we shut down that screaming part of our brain when like the violence starts because we have to get the job done, right?
Yeah, it feels a little bit more like they are somewhere between a like they're just very experienced cyborgs, where it's like they talk a little bit about like the dues of being uh re-sleeved and like coming back online, where it's like you usually feel sluggish, you have to adjust to whatever the new like biophysical environment that you've just been injected into, which can be challenging for other people, but they're like particularly adaptive and they can just like get up and go basically, which is
Yeah, they know
cool.
how to work through it. Yeah, Kovac still like in the beginning of the book, he was like, "Yep, I've got sleep sickness. This kind of sucks, but I know how to do this." And he's like, "Step 1, step 2, step 3," right?
Right.
All the way up until he was like, "Okay, I've been awake for 16 hours and I want to die." Right?
Yeah. And I think I loosely remember what you're talking about, where the show has like little maybe flashbacks. Stop me if I'm wrong, but it like explores a little bit more this idea of, what are they called? Quellists? Where it's like
Yeah, the
people,
Quellis.
yeah,
Yeah.
that
So it made it seem like these so
go
after
off.
I read after I read the book, I really hated the show so much because like in the TV show they made these Quellis seem like semi-spiritual terrorists. Like I don't have a better word for it. And then Kovac also had like in the show like this romantic relationship with the leader, right? That never happened. Like it just didn't happen like whatsoever. In fact, talking about his personal life, Raylene in the show was not his sister either in the book. And in fact, when you take a look at how they tried to make Raylene his sister and put it into the plot of the show, like, it completely broke the show, like, it didn't make any sense, like, whatsoever. Um, and that really blew me. But you know, for some reason, and again, I'm gonna pick on Netflix a little bit because they like to do like these queer, not queer, sorry, I apologize, wrong word. They like to do these weird changes that maybe when they're in the narrative room they make sense, or maybe I don't know, maybe the producer's girlfriend came in and said that we have to do XYZ. That happened to me at one point when I was working for one company, and like literally like, my girlfriend said this, and so we can't do that. I was like, are you freaking kidding me right now?
Hey, listen, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna do a good job on this one thing we're building, or I'm gonna keep my relationship in check.
It's a hard check,
I'm not
yeah.
about to risk that.
But yeah, and so what then when they turned like this one character into the sister, like, and then they kept working in these flashbacks where she kept having like weird sister envy about like the leader that again in the book had no romantic interest in. So and the fact that there was like this weird sister jealousy about the whole thing was just like completely weird to me. I was like, again, I always think that there's somebody in the narrative room trying to work out like some stuff that they would like to have more, eyes on, so to speak.
Mm,
But in the show, it just broke everything apart. And I'll never forget, like, so Kovac, right? Kovac in the book, like, don't get me wrong, this guy has feelings, right? Mostly rage
yeah,
and
lots
irritation
of
and annoyance,
violence,
right? Yeah, lots of violence. He's got
impatience,
got some anger issues. But in
lust.
for some yeah, and for some reason in the show, they have him cry nonstop at the end. Like he's just always crying, and I don't understand why. Um, and maybe it's because they're trying to, I don't know, like normalize crying or make it seem like crying is okay. But if you think about like all the death and destruction that he did at the beginning, and then he just turns into like nothing but a giant crybaby at the end of the show, I was like, I don't, what is happening? Like, this is not the same character that I walked into. And there wasn't enough of like a story transition to make him realize that Jiminy Cricket reminded him that he had thoughts, feelings, and morals and stuff like that. Like that never happened, right?
Hmm.
From beginning of story to end of story, he was still shooting everyone in the room up. It never stopped. In
Yeah.
fact, one of my favorite scenes, and again, I'm gonna remind anybody if you want to watch this, it's graphic, okay, and like not like an exclusive like shocking detail, but there's definitely some stuff in there that will make people upset. And there was a scene where he was, like, on this, Sky City, the Sky Resort thing, and he came out and he found this dog that had been abused, right? And he was like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna have to go kill somebody." And I remember, like, hearing that, and I was like, "Yeah, you have to go kill somebody. You don't fuck with dogs."
Yeah. The pattern that I picked up on, that I got very comfortable with as I was listening to it, was like he goes into a place, he's kind of smarmy, he sasses whoever it is that he's talking to. Uh, Something goes wrong, there's violence, uh, he gets hurt, and then is overwhelmed with feelings of like vindictive rage, and then
Mhm.
murder ensues, and then he goes somewhere else and is sassy to somebody else. That's basically his three modes: hurt, angry, and kind of a wise ass.
Why is that? Yeah. Yeah, defend yourself with sarcasm. Yeah.
Yeah, which
So,
was great.
um
I think that one of the things I appreciate that we didn't talk about before, the good job of how tonally consistent the voices of the different characters were.
Mhm.
I felt like I got a pretty good image of who everybody was, even down to like pretty minor characters. Like I kept thinking, um, how what's the guy Bancroft, his lawyer
Oh, yeah, yeah.
character, something in like the, even without like obviously the guy reading it, Todd McLaren, did a great job. He didn't do a ton of voice work. There was some voice work, but even stripping away that and just thinking about the sort of body language that's described, and also the word choice, and just kind of the level uh, of various characters, like vocabulary and like what they gravitate toward, was so um, well distinguished between multiple characters, which is something that even as a DM, I feel like I'm not the best at. I feel like everything sort of like slides into this one direction, uh, as opposed to like, um, everyone having like a really consistent identity that anyone can pick out at a glance. But I feel like if you were to show me a line of dialogue from this book and not tell me which character said it, I could probably guess.
Yeah, and working with diction and syntax like that is kind of a learned skill when I'm working with people that are trying to kind of, I guess, hone their dialogue. I always tell them to like listen to the radio, right? Like listen to people talking on the radio or listen to folks on TV shows. Like don't watch it, but listen to it and see if you can pick out like the different verbal tics that they have and all of that. I want to say a good counter example to this book, since we're talking about how good this one is actually The Killing Floor by Lee Child, and so that's one of the Jack Reacher books. And it's going to be one of those very few stories where I'm like, the show's better than the book. But if you actually go and read the book, it's really hard to figure out who is talking because everybody's got the same diction, they have the same vocabulary, and they all have like the same way of enunciating things, right? Even like the out of state cop there still speaks like everybody else who's there. So it doesn't it's really hard, and you really need the narrator of that book to kind of like help do the segregation at that point. But I mean, if you've got like 12 hours, I'd say go ahead and give it a listen.
That's funny. I like that they have the example of an out of state cop that you can even point at and be like, okay, come on now. Why does this one sound the same?
Well, yeah, because you've got Jack Reacher, who's not from the area whatsoever, but he speaks like everybody that's from like this small town state. And then you have like this out of state detective who I'm guessing is either coming from New York or Chicago, right? Like, I don't quite remember off the top of my head, but somewhere up north, right? But still comes to the Midwest and still pretty much talks like everybody else. And I'm like, no, like that's not how this works. Like there would be like a couple of quirky things, or maybe you could see that the detective is trying to blend in, but he's not quite doing it right. Like I can attest to that because when I was in the military, one of the first things that they taught you to do is blend in with your local area, especially when you're overseas, because a lot of times military members, when they're in foreign countries, they always get a bad rap, which I'm going to say is deservedly so, because once they go off base, they get a little crazy. But we try to honor like language and customs and traditions and stuff like that to help build that rapport. And I know that like there's always like that subtle pressure when you go from one area to another to try and blend in. I remember you went from Texas to Washington State, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Did you experience anything like that, or is it just all completely in my head?
Um, I don't know actually. I think so. I mean, there were definitely there was like an experience of people trying to pick out. Honestly, the feedback I would get the most was like colleagues and coworkers would say, "Oh, I counted on you having a more obvious accent," and they would have to like listen for it, and then they'd be like, "Oh, I think I can pick it out," and that was like the most of the feedback that I got. Or they'd like be upset when I said, "No, actually, I'm not a huge fan of country music," stuff like that. But
Yeah.
no, I think I did the job of blending in pretty well, but I'm also probably not the most southerner.
Mm.
Um, I will say that my wife has given the feedback since we moved back, because she still works predominantly with uh, folks from the Pacific Northwest, is that she does feel a need to like sort of distinguish herself, you know,
Hmm.
a little bit, and like stand out and say like, yes, this is where I live. I am an individual with my own beliefs. I hold my own
Hmm.
beliefs. I am not a part of any sort of monolith on the basis of where I live. So
Oh
I
yeah,
guess
yeah.
sort of inverse opposite issue as like needing to blend in somewhere. But
Yeah, I remember when I first moved to England, the first thing that my stepmother did was she tried to I had a little bit more of a twang when I first went to England, And she tried to erase that as fast as possible, and the reason she did it was because in England, if you have any kind of, like, Southern accent or twang or anything like that, everybody in England usually just assumed that you were a dumb fuck, right?
Sure.
And she didn't want me to go through that, so she did her best. I still had an American accent, but I guess we'll say it's more cosmopolitan at this point.
It's been trained out of you.
But yeah, yeah, she really did. She got it out of me, but it comes out every now and then, like, don't be fooled. But I'll remember. It's so funny because 'cause I'll never forget. Because I went back to go to one of my friend's high school graduations because she was on a military base and she was graduating. I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna go. I wanna be there. I wanna celebrate with you." And she and I were on a bus going somewhere, and this was already after I'd been living in Arizona for a couple of years.
Hmm.
So England was having a quote, quote "heat wave." So, it was like 92 degrees outside. So for somebody from Arizona, like, our average summer is like, is at 110,
Yeah.
right?
Their
So
AC
I was
units
pretty.
are shit over there. So
Oh yeah, no, they're
I bet
totally
it was
shit.
a
Like,
heat
don't.
wave.
Yeah. But I was really used to just walking out in like 110-degree weather, hydrating and standing in appropriate shit. Like, I was just used to it.
Hmm.
And I'll never forget, I was at the bus stop and I was waiting for the bus to show up. And this British lady came over and she was like, "I would be so hot if I was you right now." And I was like, "Did I ask for your opinion?" Right? And the moment she heard me, you could see her face change. And I was like, "I'm from Arizona, America. Can I help you right now?" And she was like, "I'm going to go." And I was like, "You have a good day." Right?
You're about to be knife crimed against.
Yeah. But I guess it's always funny because I don't know what she felt. Maybe because, I mean, I always look young, right? Like, I ran into somebody that thought I was 22, and I was like, "Okay, keep thinking that. I really appreciate it." But I guess because I always look young, people always just assume that, like, I just walked out of, like, the village, right? And so they come over to reprimand me, and so when I immediately check them, there's always, like, that confused look on their face, like they don't know what to do. It's always I find great entertainment from it, but I also wish people would stop doing it.
That's very good of you. I feel like the diplomat in me would simply not allow it. I would be like, "Oh, if you only knew the half. Oh, I'm so hot. Oh, it's terrible. But thank you for your concern."
You would make them get you water, wouldn't you?
Probably by the end of it, yeah.
Let's see. I think there was one more thing I wanted to talk about with Altered Carbon because I wanted to get your thoughts on it. Let's see. We already talked about Ortega. We talked about the weird romance, not romance that happened. We did talk about the graphic stuff that happened in the story. I bitched about Rail because I couldn't stand it. Um, and you said you didn't get very far in the show, right?
Yeah, and it was kind of a
Okay.
while ago. I would have to stretch to recall some of the
Okay.
stuff.
No, I wouldn't put you through that. It's okay. So I guess the last thing I wanted to get your thoughts on was, how do I word it? I guess the ending of the story, right?
Hmm.
It's almost like kind of Wild West where the job gets done, he gets on the horse and he rides off into the sunset, right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. He rides the light into the cosmos. Um, I thought my opinion of the ending was that for as messy as everything was throughout, the ending felt so tidy. Do you know what
Yeah,
I
like it
mean?
all came together really
Right,
well.
like
Yeah.
everything that needed to happen happened, and it all just sort of like fell into place, which I guess is
Mm-hmm.
good. But I didn't feel. I guess it was my expectation because a lot of the times cyberpunk is kind of like a pretty cynical genre. You know, I was not expecting
Mm-hmm.
him to score an A plus. But he did. So good for him.
Yeah, I really liked how he had so many different plot points that were going on in the story, right? We had the obvious, like, main murder mystery that was going on. We had, like, the subplot of Ortega trying to save the sleeve of her lover so that way he could get the body back. And then all those fun kind of subtle weavings of us finding out about, like, the hacker and the assassin, all this other stuff. Like, he had so much stuff that was going on within the story that I was almost worried it was too big for the book, but then at the very end, he managed to just all tie it all together, and I was like, "This is like a masterclass of how to take your vision and put it forth in a way that works."
Yeah, I did like at least that it wasn't like all of the fun and games of Act 2 did not distract from the focus of the ending, because
Yeah, there really wasn't a lot of that, was there?
yeah, they found excuses to like make it all be relevant at the end, or
Yeah.
explain how it worked in the end. So that actually is quite good.
Yeah, I
Maybe
really like
it's
that because half the time when you read a book or you watch a movie and they've got the fun and games part of it. And so, for anybody who doesn't know, that's a particular story beat where we see a character interacting with other characters. Maybe it's a training montage or something like that. And it usually is supposed to flesh out like characters and scenes and stuff like that. But, the thing that we're kind of talking about is that even though we had that going on, everything still involved with, like, the main plot at some point, like, it was still contributing, it wasn't just, like, background flavor or anything like that.
yeah. Because sometimes I'll find that like they introduce a B story and a C story and maybe even a C and a half story, and then they either fail to wrap up really anything because they're dragging on all these different things to partial conclusions, and then a book becomes a duology, and will you or won't you pick up the second copy?
That's that
uh
sounds like all the Fast and Furious movies right there.
I wouldn't know. But I believe it. The um yeah, the nice thing is, and I guess the eloquent thing craft wise, is that it all served a purpose, which is nice beyond
You
just
have to
tonal
watch at
stuff.
least one of those movies now. You have to know. You need a point of comparison. You can't just having diamonds. You have to at least hold some coal, okay?
Yeah, yeah, I know. I've done a pretty good job of being a coal free diamond zone, but yeah, so say levy anyway. So unless, I mean, in the absence of anything else, do you have maybe a review note that you want to leave? I feel like we were pretty glowing in
Yeah,
our
yeah, no, it's pretty good. Like I said at one point in the beginning, again, if you're somebody who doesn't really like graphic details, whether it be violence or sexual, this is probably not going to be a read for you. But if that doesn't bother you and you really want to explore a world where they kind of talk about the nature of the human soul and how the way that you view things is kind of depicting on the perspective that you're shoved into, so to speak, I think you would really have a lot of fun with it. And as far as cyberpunk books and stories go, this definitely is gonna sit right next to my favorite, which is again is Ghost in the Shell. Like so, those two are like on the same shelf as far as I'm concerned, and I absolutely love Ghost in the Shell. It's like my all-time favorite.
hmm yeah, I would second that. I would say that if you maybe had an interest in the cyberpunk genre, this is such an easy primer to slide into and like get the feel for what goes on. This is not like super heavy cyberpunk, you know. It sort of stands apart a little bit in that I feel like the elements of noir that and like detective stories that they wove into this subtracted from the feel of like what I would call a more pure cyberpunk. So this is a really great way to slide into it if you don't already have interest in that genre. Um, Also, I think thing that I noticed, and I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, was sometimes there will be books that I know are good that I have to sort of force myself to read, and then eventually I have a great appreciation for what they accomplish. This is one of those like pleasant delight books where the the hook is immediate, or it was at least for me. I think it's like a very good example of a book establishing interest very early on. So that's very fun, very gratifying. Sort of piecing things together can be a fun mental exercise if you're that kind of reader. Um, yeah. So all in all, great, good option. I would pick it up. And I guess that's my review.
That's a fantastic review. So we
Yeah.
only have one question left, which is
hmm
what book are we reading next? I picked this one, so the next one's yours.
Yes. I have not done a great amount of thinking about it. obviously, like while I was reading this, I was just thinking again and again and again about Snow Crash, which is like that is what I would consider pretty pure cyberpunk. Um, I don't know that I want to go back to back cyberpunk, so I think I might sort of save that one for another time. Um, how about okay? So I'll give you the choice. There are two. I have two options. One of which I think is just kind of funny, and it could end up being very good. I don't know enough to know if it would be or not. And the other one is like one that I think we both have exposure to, so it would just be a reread. So option one, the reread, Invisible Cities. If you would have
Oh, the poetry
interest
book, right?
in doing it's like travelogue poetry anthology.
Mhm.
So that's option one. Option two, which is not my normal type of read, but it is a book that recently came into my home. Uh, and there's something about the review or the primer that I have been given explaining why it came into the home that has me so curious about it. And I hope I don't say it wrong. I'm actually going to look it up here just to make sure that I give you the right title.
Okay.
Yes, this is indeed the one. A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah Moss,
Oh dear,
which has been
Sarah Moss.
introduced to me as fairy smut.
I know this book. I know it really well, and I'm gonna say we're gonna pick that one because I really, really want to put you through those paces.
Okay. Okay, great. So good.
Yeah.
Well, my wife will be delighted. So that'll be what we do next time.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay, perfect. Yes, I really I know. Okay, so it sounds really bad. I just want to have you read it just so I can hear like your agonized wails from over here. That's
Uh-huh.
why.
Okay. Well, you never know. We might find a glimmer of hope. Who can
No,
say?
you're gonna hate it. You're gonna hate it.
Oh,
I'm gonna relish in
all
it.
right. Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'll have
That was
done it to myself. A self-inflicted wound.
we'll pick something good next time, I promise. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm actually looking forward to this. All right, so that's going to wrap us up for this particular episode. Thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out with us. Please feel free to leave your thoughts and opinions on this book if you've read it, or if by our review you've decided to buy or not buy it. I'm definitely curious. And yeah, I guess that's going to be us for this episode. Thank you guys for coming and listening to what we had to say today.
See you around.
Bye.
Bye.